Whenever we have a bad habit, it's a bad habit to our conscious mind, but it's a good habit to our subconscious. What sort of dynamics do you tend to see with people in that kind of space?
We need to recognize what is it that this is doing? What purpose is it serving? And is there another way to get that need met?
Her name is Thais Gibson.
Thais Gibson.
Thais Gibson.
Thais Gibson.
Thais Gibson.
Thais Gibson.
I hope I pronounce her name properly. Thais Gibson.
I am so excited for you to be here with me today. Thank you for joining us. Eric, thank you so much for being here with me today. I'm really excited to dive into this topic of how we can really leverage the understanding of human behavior to create more happiness and wisdom in our lives. And I know this is something that you're writing a book about and working on in the background now. And I know this is something that you've overcome and really been able to create in your own life based on your own experiences and inner work. And I just love that you have such a powerful story of being a wounded healer, somebody who's really sharing this information with others after doing that deep inner work yourself. So for anybody listening, will you tell us a little bit about your backstory and your journey into this work and why this has been meaningful for you and how this all started?
Yeah, I think the important part of the story is that by the age of 24, I was a homeless heroin addict and was looking at going to jail for a really long time. I had hepatitis C. I weighed 100 pounds. So I was in really bad shape. So this question of how do we change our behavior was pretty paramount to me at a pretty early age. It was sort of figure this out or jail or death were kind of the things that seemed pretty prominent in my future. So from there, I sort of did that and figured that out. And then I began to just go through the normal things that all of us go through as adults. How do I keep a job and do well at it? How do I take care of my physical health? How do I take care of my emotional health? How do I raise good children? All the normal things that tend to start to come with adulthood. So I first had this really significant challenge of changing behavior around addiction, but then just the normal challenges that we all have around behavior. And behavior is really, really important because if our behaviors aren't in line with the things that are most important to us, if they're out of alignment, we're going to have bad outcomes in life. But even more importantly, we're going to feel bad about ourselves. And that's the higher cost to me of when our behaviors aren't in alignment with the things we value, is the internal feeling that we have of being mildly out of control, of being out of alignment with who we really are. And so this idea of how we change behavior is really important to me. And you and I talked on the show, it was interesting a little bit about the idea of the subconscious driving a lot of our behavior, which is absolutely true. And there's another view, right, which is equally true, which is that our behavior drives our emotions and how we feel. And so there's these different places we can intervene in our lives. We can intervene behaviorally, we can intervene emotionally, and we can then work with our thoughts and our beliefs. And all of them are valid places that we are able to improve our lives. And it just becomes a matter of which one is the right one to do at what time.
Absolutely. I love that. Okay, so are you comfortable if I just ask you a couple other questions about your story first? Because that was a big thing to go through quite quickly. So did you have and if you're comfortable sharing, as much or as little as you'd like, but did you ever have, I really believe, for example, that when we get into a space where we go into addiction, there's these deeper reasons. And a lot of them are from unresolved previous experiences. Do you think that there was anything in your early life that really shaped landing in that space for a period of time? And also, when you decided to move into a journey of sobriety, did you have any kind of pivotal moment or teacher, or what was that sort of catalyst that led you into change?
Yeah, I think that you don't descend to the levels of addiction that I did if there's not something else wrong. Mm-hmm. By the time I was 10, I was a kleptomaniac. I was always in trouble, and I was always just unsettled. Now, I think that reducing, reducing addiction to a single cause is reductive, right? It's a multi-causal thing, and we don't know what all the causes are, and they combine in ways we don't fully understand. But we do know that the more trauma you had in childhood, whether that's lowercase t trauma and as far as neglect in an ongoing way, or capital T trauma, that certainly makes you far more likely to become an addict. And I certainly had the smaller t trauma for sure, of just parents that were doing the best they could, but that had their own versions of mental illness that they were both dealing with, and just not really knowing what to do with a somewhat precocious, highly sensitive child like me.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there may be bigger things back there. I have almost no memory of childhood. So there are certain people who say, well, if you don't remember anything, it's because some really bad things happened. I don't know if that's true or not true. I have no idea. So there's no way for me to know. But certainly, yes, I do think that I emerged from there not comfortable in my own skin.
Mm-hmm.
And so addiction was a really great way that I suddenly felt a whole lot more comfortable in my own skin. And I think that for me, addiction was not just escape. I think that's the easy narrative. But for me, it was actually that I believe I had numbed myself to a great degree just in self-protection, not feeling, and addiction for me was a way back to actually feeling. It was a thing that caused me to feel alive again. Now, over time, as my addiction began to get worse and I began to do things to support my addiction that I felt worse about, and my life sort of just spiraled downwards, then yeah, escape, I think, becomes a bigger part of, and that's a really damaging cycle of addiction, is you feel bad, so you take your substance or your behavior to feel better. But then you feel worse because you probably just behaved in a way you don't feel good about. And what do you do when you feel bad? You engage again. So it's a downward spiral. So escape became part of it, but it started from alcohol and drugs were my way of coming back to life, not hiding from it.
I hear that. It's so interesting because I think there's sort of two pathways where a lot of people are like, oh, if you don't have a lot of memories from childhood, you had all this severe trauma. And yes, that can be one output, but a lot of the times in the research that I've done, a lot of it is how we encode memory is through a lot of emotion. The more emotion there, it tends to play a crucial role in the encoding of memory, especially from short-term into longer-term memory. And it's interesting because a lot of children who go through neglect, even though that may be a more small T trauma, but it's pervasive, right?
Yep.
Well, when we go through neglect, we tend to suppress our emotions more. And I find that there's a relationship or at least association or link between people who, are suppressing their own emotions more, but then also tend to remember less. And you can see how that may have some sort of causal relationship there.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's just continued. I just have terrible episodic memory really throughout my whole life. It's just not something that my brain does well. And I don't know what the reasons are, but it is.
Interesting. So was there, before we dive into the topic of habits and how this really can change, because I think you'll have some amazing shares for individuals here today listening. But do you see anything on your own path of there was a catalyst or something that a mentor or a person that came into your life at that critical moment where it was sort of between jail or death or, hey, it's time to really change?
I don't think there are pivotal moments that we could look at. And I think this is an interesting thing when we talk about how people change, because the popular narrative is one that you're describing, is of some sort of epiphany or pivotal moment or person that comes, this thing happens and you're just different afterwards. And if you were to look at the movie version of my life, you would see a moment where I was in a detox center and they said, we think you need to go to long-term treatment. And I said, no. And I went back to my room there at the detox center, and I had a sort of, as they call them in recovery, a moment of clarity where I realized if you go back out, you're probably going to die or go to jail. And I came back and I said, I'll go into long-term treatment. So that's like, if you're going to make a movie, That's the moment you'd film. However, that moment would be irrelevant without thousands of smaller moments after where I continued to make the right choice and was informed by countless moments before that, where I saw a degree of clarity around my addiction and I tried to make a change, but it didn't work. And then maybe I tried something else and that didn't work. And so all these things are part of a bigger narrative. But, if you're going to look at the moment, that was sort of the pivotal moment of where I was able to stay sober. But I can go back. I mean, I had been to detox before. I had been to treatment before. I had made plenty of attempts to get better. This one just happened to be the one that worked.
Beautiful, beautiful stuff. So let's talk about it. So on your journey to building new habits and leveraging your understanding of human behavior and how it works, where would you advise somebody to start? So let's say we're not talking about somebody who struggled with things that you or I struggled with. Let's say we're talking about somebody who struggled with making better choices in their anger, their relationship to expressing anger, or to stopping any kind of unhealthy habit in their life. And they're realizing, you know what, this really isn't working for me any longer. Where do you often get people started on that process?
I think that the first place is you're describing is to get some degree of clarity of what the behavior is costing you. And not in a judge yourself and be really hard on yourself way. Because it turns out that when we are really hard on ourselves and we run ourselves down, we aren't actually capable of learning, right? All our energy is going into the emotional cycle that's fueling this thing. And what we need to be able to do is to learn and think about what's happening. So clarity first on why does this actually matter? It's become fairly common as people have in the last, I would say, really 5 years or so have started to talk more about habits. It's become sort of normal for people to put down and say that the role of motivation isn't that important. Don't rely on only motivation, people say. And that's true. You don't want to rely on only motivation, but it is a key part of the whole thing. And motivation is important. So why is it that I want to change? And what about that at the most visceral level can I get in touch with? Why does this really matter to me? We are exposed to on the internet these days, particularly if you're out there sort of looking for answers in life, right? We are exposed to 1,000 different healing modalities and things that we should do. And you need to meditate and you need to exercise and you need to do this and you need to do that. And you need to work on your attachment style and you need to, all of it, right? And the problem, the challenge there is that nobody can do all those things. Mm-hmm. And so it becomes really helpful to get clear on what specific change do you want to make? And I'm a big believer in this idea that little by little, a little becomes a lot. And so it's good to take the type of change that tends to stick with people is the type of change where consistent, sustainable actions are taken again and again and again and again over time. And those really accumulate into something important. And so it's first, what do I want to change? Why is that important to me? And then what are sustainable actions that I can take moving forward that take into account the context of my life? It's very easy for us to keep adding things we should do to our lives. And the problem is we have to look at every time we are adding something new to our life that we're going to do, a positive behavior, that time's got to come from somewhere. So where is it coming from? And getting clear on here are all the things I'm going to have to say no to because I simply don't have the time to say yes to them.
Mm-hmm. I can think back as you're sharing about times where I had, sort of in the depths of my own challenges and issues. And one thing that would come up a lot, and I'm curious how you would respond to this, because I had my own sort of way that I worked through this at the time, but I was such an all or nothing thinker, and that's
Yeah.
one of those main cognitive distortions. And so when you say little by little, a little becomes a lot, like it's such a hard hitting truth, and there's so much value in that point. I just wanted to pop in here and let you know we are doing a 7-day free trial to the All Access Membership Pass at PDS, which means you get access to literally everything inside of the school. And this includes the 4 live webinars I do with our students every single week. And on top of that, you get access to all of our different courses. We have over 55 different courses on relationships, communication, boundaries, emotional mastery, guilt and shame, learning your needs, so many different facets that are really important to master our lives and feel really good about our lives going forward. And last but not least, there's a daily community event. We have trained facilitators and coaches who are in there doing that work, showing up to support you on your journey every single day. Please join me on the other side. Come check it out. See if it's a fit for you. I'd love to see you there. Go ahead and sign up by clicking the link in the description box below. And what would you say to somebody like me at the time who says, who would do things like, anything that I would say, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to start down the path. Let's just take a really simple example. Like I'm going to eat clean. I'm going to eat really healthily. And then, I rushed out the door this morning. I forgot to eat breakfast. I grabbed a muffin on the way because I was starving. Now I ate a muffin. Now I might as well eat junk food the whole day.
Yes.
And what do you say to individuals in that kind of place who jump into those cognitive distortion way of thinking?
Yeah. I mean, first I want to say, if you have the capacity to take on lots of change, it's not that that's bad. I mean, when I got sober, I went into 30-day treatment and my entire life was focused on recovery. Right. That was the way that life shook out for me. So I was able to make big change then, but the entire structure of my life completely changed. Mm-hmm. So it's not that we can't do it that way, but for most of us, if the whole structure of our life is not completely going and our responsibilities remain what they are, small change is often the thing that's available to us. As to your point, yes, all or nothing thinking is a real problem with making sustainable change, because almost any form of sustainable change is going to have some degree of success and failure in it. The number of people who have an addiction issue who suddenly just one day decide I'm done and make that change in their life, there are so few of them. It is almost always a process, as it was for me, of, okay, there's a situation, there's a challenge here. I'm going to try and do this to make it better. And that maybe works a little bit until it doesn't. And then we learn from that. We go, okay, well, geez, if I don't plan ahead the night before for my food, then I'm going to run out the door and eat bad food. And so it's this ongoing learning process. And if we are in an all or nothing mindset, which says that if I'm not completely successful at this, I have failed, that really stands in the way of us actually making change. So we have to work with ourselves to really realize that we are going to have starts and stops along the way. When I used to coach people on behavior change, I would say, okay, one thing we know for certain is that you're going to get off track on whatever this thing is. Let's just say it's exercise. Like, you're going to do good and then something is going to happen and you're not going to do well. Like, I almost guarantee it, unless you're a robot. So let's talk about, what are you going to do at that time? How are we going to prepare to handle the fact that there will be setbacks and not be surprised by them, not think that they mean that we are failing or we are failures? I mean, and I think that's the most important thing, is to recognize, like, that there are starts, there are stops, we are learning. An example I often give is, I think change in behavior is a little bit sometimes like learning to speak a language. And so you start learning to speak, let's just say, French, and for a while you can barely do it at all, right? You're just not very good at it, but you're trying, you're getting better. And then one day you get better, and you walk into a French bakery and you find like you're able to order a croissant and a baguette and you're feeling really good. And you're like, I'm speaking really good French. This is going great. And then later that day, you bump into two people who are native French speakers. And they start talking to each other, and you're like, I don't have the foggiest idea what they're saying. If at that moment you internalize that as, I'm never going to learn to speak French, I'm not getting anywhere, you would give up.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
And I think that, so what happens, particularly when we're trying to change behaviors, is that we begin to learn to speak that language in more and more and more situations.
Yeah, I love that. And what you're saying is you manage your expectations first and foremost, which goes a very long way. And secondly, when we prepare for those setbacks, because they're going to happen, and have a coping mechanism or plan or strategy for when that happens. And it's interesting because you and I are aligned in so many ways. I often work with people on like the meaning they give to things like that first, and reconditioning the meaning. So I'm a failure. I did this one thing wrong. And that's one entry point. But the other entry point is to have this set of strategies to prepare yourself in that kind of capacity. Now, I want to go into one other thing before we dive into some sort of actionable steps. But one thing that I've always found and taught, and I'm curious what your thoughts are about this, is whenever we have a coping mechanism, like a bad habit, we'll call it. It's a bad habit to our conscious mind, but it's a good habit to our subconscious, because it's serving us in some sort of way. And so what are your thoughts about that? And what sort of dynamics do you tend to see with people in that kind of space?
I agree with you that our bad habits tend to be serving some purpose. They make sense on some level of our being, or we wouldn't continue to do them. And so I do think we need to recognize, what is it that this is doing? What purpose is it serving? And find out, is there another way to get that need met? In behavior science, there's a classic idea of something called a habit loop. And a habit loop basically means that there is a stimulus or a trigger, there's a behavior, and then there's a reward. And so what they realize is that you can't usually, sometimes you can, but you often can't change the trigger or the stimulus. Maybe you eat ice cream every time you get really sad. Well, you're probably not able to eliminate sadness from your life. Nor are you able to escape the desire to feel better when you are sad. Like it's kind of built in, right? So that's the trigger or the stimulus and the reward. What you can do is change the behavior that sits in the middle.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right? And so then the question becomes, all right, when I am sad, what behavior can I do that's not eating ice cream, that is going to make it more likely that I'm going to feel better? Because again, that's a natural thing, is to desire to feel better. When you feel sad, you desire not to be sad. You can work with that and increase your tolerance of allowing yourself to feel sad and having capacity to tolerate more sadness, which is all good and should be done. But there's still, within that is going to be the desire to feel better. And so what is a more skillful way to make that happen? And I think that's a behavioral lens on what you're talking about. Now, there are the deeper lenses, which is, to your point, how might I reinterpret these triggers or stimulus that are making me sad? Maybe there's a way I'm viewing the world that's causing me to be more sad than I may need to be. Or maybe there are some unconscious beliefs. So I don't think it's that there's only one way to change these things, right? And I think that's what I was saying earlier. And I think you and I both agree on this, that you could be working on the underlying belief.
Yeah.
At the same time, you're working on the meaning making that you make out of events. At the same time that you also substitute healthy behaviors for unhealthy behaviors. I mean, there are many different ways in, and my experience is eventually, like for me to be what I would consider mostly cured of addiction. That's not exactly the phrase I would use, but I would say it's a non-problem for me these days. That has taken healing from a lot of different angles and a lot of different
Absolutely.
modalities over the year. It's for me to really feel like I have a robust immunity to that.
Absolutely. One of the things that I worked on a lot, and I know it sounds funny, it's because you just know me as of recently, but I actually really struggled with anger growing up, and and to your point, I also had many different entry points into the healing journey.
Yeah.
And one of the big things I did and worked on around anger is we can just suppress anger. Like we're not just going to be able to. I really don't agree with count to 10 and hold your breath and hope your anger goes away. That you'll actually see in like a lot of traditional anger management strategies still to this day. But what I did is I realized, okay, well, what needs am I getting met by being angry, by expressing anger through yelling or pushing people away or being harsh with my words? And what I found is that, well, anger serves as a subconscious strategy to get the need met to be seen, to be heard, because I raise my voice and I wave my hands to set a boundary
Mm-hmm.
and to feel like I'm actually finally communicating. And when I looked at my life, I had this big history of first people pleasing where I would not get seen, not get heard, not share my truth, not
Mm-hmm.
communicate ahead of time, and definitely not set boundaries. And what I found also in coaching people for a long time was exactly, similar to what we've been talking about here is there was this strategy or coping mechanism. We do these things because they're meeting needs in forms because we're starving first for those needs to be met. And so I think that we're very aligned in terms of those different entry points into there. And I absolutely believe there's so many ways of getting there. And I think it's important that people listening also go, well, what's working for me? Like, what's an entry point that I haven't been to or haven't worked on before? What's an entry point
Yeah.
that I might want to try? Because, there won't just be one way of healing. And if we're only going through one channel overall, there's probably a lot of things that we're really missing out on.
Yeah. I mean, an example is, I got sober in 1994 in Columbus, Ohio, in 12-step programs. And it was a very almost militant type recovery culture. It is not like what recovery culture is like today.
Yeah.
They used to say things like, sit down and shut up, take the cotton out of your ears and put it in your mouth, right? Like, just, you don't know anything. If you knew anything, you wouldn't be a homeless heroin addict. So zip it. We know what's like. And you know what? Don't ask why you're an addict. It doesn't matter. You just have to change it.
Yeah.
And that got me sober. Now, I'm not advocating for it, but it was enough because it was entirely focused on changing your behavior. There was a phrase we used to use all the time. Sometimes you can't think your way into right action. You have to act your way into right thinking. Mm-hmm. So what they were saying was, hey, you're going to want to use drugs, and no matter what you do right now. So what are the behaviors we can do that just are going to stop that from happening? Go to a meeting every day. Call your sponsor. It was very action-based. Mm-hmm. And that got me sober long enough that then I started to say, wait, there's deeper stuff going on here, that I then was able to go explore that. And so, but there are other people where exactly the opposite might be the important way to go. They may need to deal with emotional things that are happening, and that may not lead to physical sobriety right away. It may take longer to eventually get to physical sobriety. And so to your point, I think we have to experiment and try. Yes. And I think the most important message that I always give to people with stuff like this is keep trying.
Yeah, absolutely.
Keep trying, because what worked for me may not work exactly the same way for you. And what worked for you may not work for the next person, but something will work if we keep trying. And we really, I like to think of these things as puzzles. Mm-hmm. Like, there's a puzzle here that we haven't figured out how to get you to stop being, angry when you come home in the afternoon after a hard day at work and you snap at your kids and you keep doing it. We haven't figured out the puzzle yet for how to get you to do that. We haven't figured out the puzzle to get you to stop drinking or to get you to start eating better. But when we put it in that landscape of a puzzle, it moves from a moral failing and a personal failing into a problem that has an answer. And our job is to keep looking for that answer and trying with as much hope as we're able to sort of muster. And I think the job of those of us that are in the healing world is to not be too dogmatic in the healing process and to keep that hope open for people, to keep sort of saying, look, there's another, let's try again.
I couldn't agree more. And it's interesting too, because what I've found in a lot of our work is that different attachment styles tend to even respond differently to things. So our avoidance tend to respond a little bit better to the action reprogramming type of work, a lot of exposure work, things like that. Fearful avoidance tend to like to go into the root cause and go into like their feelings and what meaning and belief. So it's very interesting and such an important message that it's not a one size fits all dynamic. And it's important that we explore those different avenues. And just to what you said, like a lot of times when we go in through one avenue, we get comfortable there and then we go to the other avenues. Then we go the other pathways because we open to these things and we start to understand them more. And so it's just one entry point into a house that everybody can sort of go into all the different rooms of in a way. So the summer is coming to a close and now it's time to welcome in probably our much busier season. And if you're anything like me, the last place you probably want to be spending time is figuring out what to eat for dinner and standing in long grocery store lines. So you can make life easier with HelloFresh, which is America's #1 meal kit. With fresh ingredients and simple recipe cards delivered straight to your door, HelloFresh takes care of all of your meal planning, shopping, and meal prep. And I really can't express how much time HelloFresh has actually saved me each and every week. What I love most is the variety. So whether you're looking for fit and wholesome or quick and easy, vegetarian, or even family-friendly options, their ever-changing recipes keep food exciting when it comes to dinner and never leave me feeling like I'm making the same meals and just eating the same food over and over again. So if you're ready to save time and make cooking much more enjoyable for you and your loved ones, you can go for free breakfast for life at HelloFresh.com/free Thais. That's THAIS. And you'll get one free breakfast item per box while your subscription is active. That's free breakfast for life just by going to HelloFresh.com/free Thais, THAIS. And now for a word from our sponsors. If you need to hire, you need Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that actually helps you find quality candidates fast. So you can ditch the busy work. And you can use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging, which allows you to then connect with candidates much faster. And Indeed doesn't just help you hire faster. 93% of employers agree that Indeed delivers the highest quality matches compared to other job sites, according to a recent Indeed survey. And one of the things I love about Indeed is that it makes all hiring in one place easy because you literally have the perfect match of candidates there. In fact, Indeed is something that we use all the time for hiring candidates at the personal development school, and I would feel a little bit lost without it, to be perfectly honest. When I was looking to hire somebody, it was originally slow and overwhelming until I decided to just go straight to Indeed, and that's when everything became a lot more simple. And it's still something that we use and will continue to use all the time. Leveraging over 140 million qualifications and preferences every day, Indeed's matching engine is constantly learning from your preferences as well, so the more you use Indeed, the better it actually gets. So you can join 3.5 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent fast. And listeners of the show will actually get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/Thais. Just go to Indeed.com/Thais right now, and you can support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this particular podcast. Again, that's Indeed.com/Thais. Terms and conditions may apply. Need to hire, you need Indeed. Now, I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are about shame and shame playing a role in preventing us from being able to rewire habits or change and create more healthy behaviors in our lives, because I think there's a big relationship there. And I'd love to hear what your thoughts are about that.
I think there is a really big relationship there. And shame is, I'm not going to pretend to be an expert in healing shame I'm not. I think I found my way into it for myself, and I know some things that work, and I've worked with people that it just seems like it's just so deeply embedded and so hard for them to let go of that it remains a mystery to me. For me, shame, the healing of shame for me largely came from recognizing that there were other people like me who had felt what I felt, and that community of being around other people. It's one of the beautiful things that 12-step programs do, or recovery programs in general, is you walk in and you're filled with shame. I can't believe all these things I've done, the things I've thought, the way I feel. And then somebody else starts talking and you're like, wait a second, that is the exact inside of my brain. I had no idea. That happens often enough, and you see it in people that you respect, and you go, oh. And to me, that sort of naturally melted the shame, and just repeated exposure to that again and again melted shame away for me. But as I've said, I've seen people who it seems to be more entrenched. And so if that sort of first layer of intervention doesn't work, that's sort of where I'm saying, like, I'm not an expert sort of beyond that on how to heal it, but it's a hugely important part, because it does block learning. And as we've sort of said, if we treat all of this as learning and as a puzzle, if you're not capable of learning, then you're ultimately not going to be capable of changing, because that is the change process. You have to learn as you go. And so shame is a huge block. It's one of the engines that drives addictions of all sorts.
Absolutely. And that's why I brought it up, is because you were speaking to the puzzle part, right? Like that this is something we have to look at as there's something going on here for some particular reasons, and I can solve for it and try to figure it out. But I find that when we are so busy shaming ourselves for the behavior itself, then we don't really have the room to figure it out. And I personally believe as a root cause, and I think it's the system we get conditioned in a way. You know, we go through the socialization process of classical conditioning, and it's you're punished for doing wrong, rewarded for doing right, and we become afraid of the punishment, and we feel shame sometimes also from not receiving the reward. And I think that we then think as adults, okay, I have to shame my way into change. I have to punish my way into change, because that's the system that we got conditioned to think it's within. And in my experience, in my own healing of addiction, or healing of so many other aspects of my life, whether it's my attachment style or so many different avenues, the biggest thing was one of the biggest things was I actually had to work on releasing shame, because as soon as I shamed myself, I would go right back to that behavior that then was to try to soothe my way out of how terrible I was feeling.
Yeah. I teach a program called Habits That Matter, and it's one of the foundational principles is one of learning to be kinder to ourselves, because if you don't, two things happen. One is you turn all of this work that we're trying to do into a way to feel worse about yourself, because you can't do it perfectly, because you can't. You're not going to. So if you don't have that orientation, you can often end up feeling worse than when you began, because now you feel like a failure at yet another thing.
Yes.
And then secondly, to your point, we can't learn when we're in that deep shame state. And so, you know, it's why, like I said, when I would be working with people, I would really work on, like, the minute I would hear them start to say things like, I'm the kind of person who, I'd say, hang on, now we need to talk about that. Because that belief, like, I'm the sort of person that can't finish things, which is what a lot of people came to me with, right? Because a lot of people would come to me trying to make positive behavioral changes and just not having success or not being able to stick with them. And they had this idea, I'm the sort of person who can't finish things.
Mm-hmm.
And that'll do you in, because the minute that you don't succeed, that belief will come right back up and it will reinforce itself. And it's a form of shame, right? And so we have to move it from personality, you know, and I like to talk about, like, well, it's good to know your tendencies, like to pretend to, because there's truth in what somebody's saying. I'm the sort of person who can't finish things. there's truth in you in the past have had a hard time finishing things. And we should recognize that. And we should know that that's been a pattern of yours. But I really try and get people to think of as tendencies. I have a tendency to behave this way, but it's not who I am. It's not an inbuilt personality trait that can't change. It's partially when I interviewed you, one of the things I loved, right, in talking about attachment styles was your focus on that may be the attachment style you have, but it doesn't have to be the attachment style that you keep.
Yes.
That it can change, right? And so I think that there's this element in personal change of really having to recognize our patterns or our tendencies, but also at the same time keep a real big focus on the possibility of growth that hasn't happened yet and can happen.
Absolutely. I really love that. It's like, the acknowledgement of a pattern perhaps, but not the attachment to that will always be.
Yes. It's a good way to say it. It's a good way to say it. Yeah.
I love that. I think that's such an important thing that we probably don't hear enough in the personal development world right now. So if you could give somebody sort of a roadmap, okay, from a behavioral science perspective, and we talked about first acknowledging the costs, and then we talked about being able to sort of evaluate the behavior. What would you say are then those strategies? Is it going into the managing of the expectations and helping them define like small action steps that they can take? Is there anything that precedes that, or anything you would share after that on sort of a roadmap to somebody who may be really looking to change some of their habits today?
I think the challenge is that when we talk about adding positive behaviors versus reducing negative behaviors, we're talking about very different things. So it's hard to sort of give a roadmap that covers both. But I think I can give a couple guidelines that I think people can use that can be helpful. There's a general principle that says, and this is very behaviorally focused, but that if you want to do less of something, make it as hard as possible to do it. Erect as many barriers as you possibly can between you and that thing. And conversely, if you want to do more of something, eliminate every possible barrier that there is between you and doing that thing. And that's a guideline that can really go a long way. And it's amazing what little differences can make. This is one that I share, and I share it, and every time I do, there's a part of me that goes like, we are so weird as humans. I'm a guitar player, and I like to practice regularly and play regularly. When my guitar is on a stand, I will play it probably 75% more than when it is sitting in the exact same spot in a guitar case.
Interesting. That's funny, but it makes a lot of sense.
The difference, I mean, it takes 4 seconds to open the guitar case and pull it out. And yet, that is unequivocally true in my experience and so many other people's experiences. So it's those little things make a difference. I mean, one of the biggest findings that behavior science in general, I think if you were to bring together the 50 top behavioral scientists in the world and you ask them, like, what can you all agree on? They would all agree that the more we can do to design our environment, and that means what we see, what we pass, who we talk to, who supports us, that our environment, the things outside of us, have an outsized effect, and that you want to do everything you can to make that, to get that as right as you can, because then you need to rely on self-control way less. We all need to rely on it to some degree. There is a time where, regardless of whether the guitar is in the case or on the stand, you have to make the decision that I'm going to pick up the guitar instead of watch TV. There is a place of self-control. But all these little changes that we can make, I call them structural changes, that if we can make as many of these structural changes, and again, it's to introduce obstacles if we don't want to do something, it's to reduce them if we do, give us far more likelihood that we will succeed. and that self-control plays a smaller role than most of us think. That's the thing we all go to. I'm not disciplined. I don't have willpower. And there is a role for that, and there are ways to get better at that. But the first step is to get all the environmental things worked out. And again, I think that all behavioral scientists would agree strongly on this point.
I think that's a fantastic point. And so maybe that's a call for somebody who's like, okay, I'm trying to change whichever habit in my life here today, to start by going, okay, let me look at and almost making a list, would you say, of all of the ways that their environment is not conducive to that, and how
Yes.
can we actually start eliminating those things on the list, and then how can we come up with a list of ways that we could make it easier and
Yep.
more convenient for ourselves to take that action.
Yeah, there's something in the behavior change world called, it's very catchily named, the Transtheoretical Model of behavior change. You may have heard of it as the stages of change model.
Yeah.
And it means that change isn't just you just start doing something, right? That's called the action stage, but it's only one of multiple stages. And there are stages of, contemplation, planning, that come before action. And the time that we invest in this contemplation stage, getting clear on what matters, why it's important, the planning stage, getting all these other things sort of worked out, makes the action stage way more likely we're going to do it. So yeah, that would be my advice, is create a plan. And there's lots of resources out there for how to do that, but we want to be specific, right? Ambiguity is a chance to turn towards the thing you don't want. When you're not sure what to do, you fall back into old patterns.
Absolutely.
So specificity, clarity in a plan is going to serve you really well when you get to trying to make the action.
I love that. I think that's fantastic. So that's sort of like a 3-step system. So can we just go through that one more time? So first we contemplate.
Yep.
And that would be, why do we want to do what we're trying to do? And why does it matter? And what are the costs of the old behavior? Does that fall into that one as well?
Yeah. And what is it? What are your competing commitments? Meaning, like, I want to eat healthy, but I also want to eat cheeseburgers. That's a competing commitment, right? We all have this soup of motivation in us, right? And we want to get clear, like, okay, I want to do this. Why? And what are the reasons I want to do it? What are the reasons I might be ambivalent about doing it? It's just really getting our internal landscape squared away, is what I would say, around the change we want to make. And then, yes, then it would go into sort of planning, creating a plan. If it's a behavior trying not to do, what am I going to do when I feel sad? If I'm trying not to eat ice cream and that's my trigger, what am I going to do? Very clear, like, oh, when that happens, I will do exactly A, B, and C, and knowing what that is, and what will I do after I do that, and I still feel sad, like what, clarity on all that. And then, then it becomes action, which is what I like to call the choice point, the moment where you have to make the good decision that you want to make. That's the sort of the choice point. And that's really where self-control comes in. And we'll have links in the show notes that I'll give you, but we have a new resource I've created called the 6 Barriers to Self-Control. And they're the sort of 6 common ways that when we're at that choice point, at that decision moment, that things often go wrong for us. And it just gives a couple simple strategies for what to do in each of those cases.
I love that.
But again, my key here is don't skip the steps before that and go just to that step, right? That's the last step. And we want to rely on that as little as possible, because self-control is an inexhaustible resource.
Absolutely. That's so interesting. And just as an example, can you share one of those 6 ways that last step
Sure.
to go wrong?
Yeah. I mean, one of them I call the insignificance trap. And what it means is that whenever you're trying to do the thing, I'm just going to say exercise, your brain is telling you some version of it doesn't really matter. Like, you're like, all right, today I'm supposed to go for a walk for 15 minutes. And your brain goes, what is a 15-minute walk going to do? Like, so what? Like, 15 minutes doesn't matter whether you do it or don't do it. It's 15 minutes of walking around a block. It's not going to make that big of a difference, right? That's the insignificance trap. So we have to learn to counter that which is, in my case, I might say something like, well, 15 minutes is better than 0 minutes. And you know what? 15 minutes isn't our end goal. We eventually are going to get to the point where we're moving for an hour a day, but we're not there yet. And, little things add up. 15 minutes on top of 15 minutes on top of 15 minutes turns into something really, really significant. So it's, there are others which might be, you're just really worn out. What do I do when I'm exhausted and I'm trying to take positive behavior? What ways might I talk to myself that would do it? So those are, there's a short-sighted stumble where we're choosing what we want now versus what we want most. And what we need to do is reframe that choice into what do I want most versus what do I want now? So there's just these various different
I love that.
barriers.
I love that. It's so interesting. I can totally see the insignificance one in people where they're like, oh, well, it's not really that big of a deal. Or I can see times where I've been really tired and have a habit. And it's funny, exercise is one of them because I try to exercise every day. And on days I'm tired, I'm like, I'll just exercise really slowly or really lightly. So I can see myself naturally sort of coming around that. As having that coping mechanism. That's very, very interesting. You'll have to tell me. We'll save the worksheet for everybody listening so they can check it out. But you'll have to tell me after we finish the record button, the other 3, because I'm very curious.
Okay.
We'll put the worksheet for anybody else who wants to just click on it and check it out. This has been awesome. This has been super, super interesting. I love having this discussion. Is there anything else that you want to share or want our listeners to know before we talk a little bit more about what you're up to next?
No, I mean, I think I would just go back to that basic idea of hope, of keep trying. In AA, we used to say, keep coming back, keep coming back. And that would be my message. Don't keep coming back necessarily to 12-step programs, or that's not what I mean. But I mean, keep coming back to your own healing, your own well-being, your own belief in yourself. Keep coming back to that and keep trying. There's always, I believe, a positive forward step that we can take. It may not be a big one, but there's always something.
Absolutely. That's a beautiful message. Well, thank you so much for being here. Please let our listeners know what you're up to next, what your book will be about. And I know it's a little ways that you're working on it now. But let everybody know.
Yeah, well, you can find us at oneyoufeed.net. That's ONEYOUFEED.net. And you can find that 6 barriers to self-control there. You can get on our email list, and you can also find all of our podcast episodes, of which we have an awful lot of them at this point, with lots of wonderful guests like yourself.
Thank you. Amazing stuff. And I've listened to quite a few episodes. It's a fantastic podcast. So definitely recommend everybody checking that out. And we'll put a link to that sheet in the show notes down below as well. Thank you so much for being here, for sharing about yourself, your story, for sharing amazing tips and tools with our listeners. And really enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a real pleasure.
If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to subscribe, rate, and review us on your favorite podcast platform. Share it with friends and family who are on their journey of personal development and growth. And thank you for listening. Next week, we'll be back with more insights to guide you on your journey. And until then, keep practicing our tools and strategies to change your subconscious mind and apply some of the powerful learnings from this podcast so that you experience real life transformation.